Hello, welcome to my video blog. My name is Clinton Keith, and the subject for today's video is why agility for video game development. Now, the industry has adopted agile practices like Scrum and Kanban for over 10 years now. I still occasionally get the question of, hey, why are we using agility? Why aren't we using more planning up front and writing better documents and better schedules and just doing a better job at planning how we create projects? And so I thought I would just create this video just to share with you and talk about some of the background of why we do agility for video game development. So the little background for myself is I developed video games for 20 years and saw, when I entered the video game industry back in the early 90s, I noticed that it took about 6 people 6 months to make a game around there. And that cost increased over the next dozen or so years until it took us over 100 people to make a game and took several years. And as a result, because of that increasing cost, there was a lot of risk involved and a lot of risk aversion. And so video games got a lot more conservative, and I shipped a few games I'm not proud of because of the crunch to ship them for the launch of a console or for Christmas or whatever. And so about 12, 13 years ago, I started exploring emergent practices like Scrum, Agile practices like that, and later on Kanban, to kind of answer this question and develop the games in the way I thought they should or how they originally were. And started talking about that over 10 years ago. And about 8 years ago, I decided to do this full time of talking about Agile and training teams and coaching them. And I've written a book and visited well over 100 studios and hundreds of teams that have adopted Agile and learned about what works and what doesn't work with Agile. So the question is, again, what is Agile and why use it for video games? Now, the question kind of ignores a little bit of the history of video game development and an understanding of what Agile is. Basically, Agile is about exploring an emergent product from a value-first proposition that, instead of having a perfect plan and sticking to that plan or sticking primarily to that plan and judging a project's success, is that we're going to focus on the product itself, on the game, and judge whether that game is fun, which is basically why our customers are buying it. And if you look at the history of video game development, especially in the first decade or two, it was very agile. And so an example of that would be the arcade industry. Would build, back in the 70s and 80s, what they would do is they would they'd work on a game for a couple months based on a one-page proposition of what that game would be. And they would prototype it, take about 2 or 3 months. And then they would mock up an arcade box, roll it into a local arcade or pub on a Friday, and then come back on Monday and count how many quarters it had collected over the weekend. And they usually had a little metric that said, well, if we collected this much money or more, hey, the game is great, we'll go into production. If it didn't collect much money at all, they might even cancel it. Somewhere in between, they might give it another few months to iterate and find out what was fun that would cause people to spend their quarters on it. So that's a very agile approach, focused on the game quality first. And now, as I mentioned, after I joined the industry and saw projects grow in size, I noticed this pattern come out about when we were finding the value, when we were finding the fun. And later on, I kind of tried to graph it. And I had this graph right here that would say, well, our vertical is how much do we know about how fun this game is, and then the horizontal was time. It might be months or whatever. And when I thought back about it, on more traditionally planned and executed projects where there was a big document written up front and we saved most of our testing and optimization and polishing until the end, it kind of followed a pattern like this, where there was a design phase up front, which is useful. We want to talk about what we want to build. We just don't want to go out and say, hey, we don't know what kind of game we're going to build. We're just going to experiment all over the place and wander aimlessly. And we want a goal. But in spending all this time building the document and building parts, we really didn't discover what the actual game was. But then we had this thing. We had this event, which we still have, called E3, where we had to show off the potential product to potential buyers, Walmart, Target, companies like that. And so we had to have these demos together, maybe halfway through development, once a year, that we could show off. And so we'd hack and try to get the build to a point where you could play it for 5 to 10 minutes fast enough that would demonstrate some polish to it. And we'd go crazy, spend weeks of crunch, and have something again that might last for 5 or 10 minutes on the show floor. We'd have to reset the machine frequently, and then after E3, we'd have to reverse engineer all the hacks that we did and correct things. But we really didn't know what the game was until near the end, when you see this curve near alpha beta, which is the point where we start fixing all the bugs and getting things running at 30 frames a second. That we really know what's fun or not about the game. To me, a game that runs at 10 frames a second, I don't care what game it is, it's just not going to be fun, right? Unless it's a board game. But the problem is when you discover what the game is towards the end, you've built all the characters, you've built all the levels, you have a lot of assumptions in there, and you start running out of time, you start running out of money, and you start cutting things that might be crucial to the game, but things that are threatening your schedule might be the most riskiest things. And I always felt it's like, man, if we only had a month or two left in development, we could make this game twice as fun. And we probably could if you look at the slope of this curve here. And, it's crunch time, and it was just the least pleasant time of making games. And I found that people that don't have fun making their game usually don't make a fun game anyways. Then the thing is, when I discovered Agile in the form of Scrum, I thought back to this, and I thought back to another experience I was lucky to have, which was with Nintendo of Japan. When we started making games at my first studio, we got visits from Miyamoto from Japan every 3 months. And he didn't want a lot of documentation. He just would have an idea that he would discuss with the team making the game. And after their discussion, if he liked the idea and wanted to pursue it, he'd give him a couple months of money and tell him to go find the fun. And he'd go off, and we wouldn't hear from him for the next few months. And then he'd come back for another visit, and he would want to see what was fun about it. And if you didn't quite find what was fun about the game in a couple months, he's more likely to cancel the idea and have you start on a completely different idea. And after a while, I discovered this is one of the reasons for his success, is that he throws out maybe a dozen ideas, and maybe one or two out of those dozen find the fun and go into production. And so that's another agile approach of finding the value first and focusing on what's valuable about your product or what's fun about a game. And so in addition to finding the fun, it's about reducing that wasted effort of finding what's fun about a character or about a level vocabulary before you go off and make 12 or 16 hours of level content and dozens of characters. It's about eliminating those death marches, of knowing what the cost is of producing fun levels as you're making your first production quality level, rather than getting a dozen levels out there and discovering, we can only push half of the polygons through on each level, so we have to rebuild all these levels, and we're running out of time. So guess what? You got to live here 7 days a week. Engages developers. One of the things I remember about my best games was they were generally the most enjoyable to work on. We had a small group of people, or small teams of people, that really got engaged with what we're building. And you couldn't wait to get to work, and you had to drag yourself away. And this is one of the principles or the values of practices like those in Scrum, is to agree on a goal over the short term, 2 or 3 weeks, and have a cross-discipline team take ownership about how they achieve that goal. And this is even more appropriate to game developers because we get some of the most creative, intelligent people working on games. You got some of the best people coming out of college that have dreamt about working on games their entire life. And so the last thing we want to do is put them into a factory-like environment and say, hey, your success is based on accomplishing these tasks that we've broken down and thought out for you. I want to give them a little bit more ownership, which is a motivational factor for creative people. The other thing is it creates transparency. It tells us every 2 to 3 weeks how our game is doing. And if your game isn't fun month after month, every 2 or 3 weeks, it's telling you, oh, this kind of stinks. You got to do something about it. Now, Agile just creates a transparency. It doesn't tell you what to do with it, but it makes it harder to ignore where your game is at. If you're not finding the fun, you got to do something about that. Instead of kind of sweeping that under the carpet, maybe for some future magical post-alpha date where it's all going to somehow come together because, well, that's what the schedule says it's going to do. So, cutting down transparency, eliminating wasted effort, trying to make the environment better for developers, and just focusing on the fun. Some of the key principles of why we do Agile. Now, some people are confused. They think Agile means you don't plan. And that's certainly not the case. With Agile, teams that are doing it properly actually spend more time planning than traditional teams. The major difference is it's not done all up front. Now, we certainly do more planning up front, deciding what the game is, especially if it's a licensed game. But we spread it out more. Every 2 or 3 weeks, we're getting together for a few hours and we're discussing what's next. What is the game telling us? We're incorporating reality with the plan and making sure that the plan reflects reality, because reality is not going to budge an inch for us. So the way I like to illustrate it is to say, we have a traditional way of planning and we have a goal. Hey, we're going to spend this much money. We're going to deliver by this particular date. We want those things. Those things are important. We want to know when we're done and how much money we're going to spend. But the reality is that often when we get to that goal, even if we get to it on schedule, we discover that's not the game we really want to ship. We really want to be over here where the new endpoint is. And that's where the crunch comes in. That's where the wasted effort comes in. That's where the missed schedules come in. And it reflects this phrase that I heard decades ago called the cone of uncertainty. And the idea is that the further your plan goes out on things that are brand new, games you've never made before, new technology, that you're going to have more and more uncertainty. So if you're planning your goal as a year out, it's a lot more uncertainty than it is 2 weeks out. And so this is one of the reasons for a lot of these practices like iterations. So we have to plan. We can't just get up every morning and decide what game we're making. And so we're going to find this sweet spot of what we can reliably plan and estimate, regardless of how we estimate or forecast. And so this is one of the reasons we have 2 or 3 week iterations or sprints in Scrum. And with an Agile approach to planning, what we're going to do is to say, we'll have this horizon that we can reliably plan, and we're going to keep our options open. And at the end of that 2 or 3 weeks, we haven't spent much money. It's like Nintendo going off 2 or 3 months and saying, hey, if you haven't found the fun with your small team of maybe half a dozen people, we haven't really wasted a lot of money. And better yet, we haven't released a bad product and harmed the brand. So with an Agile planning approach, we're going to keep our options open. And then every 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to decide, are we finding the fun? And we're going to course correct a little bit, again with having that goal in mind. Can we ship by Christmas? Can we ship by the release of this movie and still have a fun experience that our players will like? And so Agile will never get you to that straight line plan to the ultimate goal of where we can ship the best possible game. But it's certainly a shorter path than relying entirely on the plan created in the 300-page document 2 years before you're supposed to ship. All right, so that's pretty much all I wanted to say, just why we're doing Agile. I'll be creating more of these videos in the future, more instructional videos for Scrum and Kanban and practices like that. In the meantime, if you want more information, you can go to my website. Also, check out my book on Amazon. And also join the newsletter that I've just started to get updates on videos like this or any information about public courses that you might want to attend or conferences and things like that. All right, thanks for your time. Bye.